What's up guys, Nito here, and welcome back. So this is going to be my first last Epoch video, and I've been playing this really cool build, which is a explosive trap, acid flask throwing Bladedancer. And I've been having a really good time with this build, and I wanted to share it with you all. There's some pretty cool interactions happening here, so let's get into it. I'm just going to do a quick monolith to kind of just show you sort of what the build looks like and how it plays, and just take a look. So basically, we are throwing out our explosive trap, and then when these detonate, they're going to fling more explosive traps at nearby enemies, and they're also going to fling acid traps. Or, sorry, acid flasks. So you can see they kind of auto-target, so like if I throw flasks over here, they're going to fire automatically over wherever the enemies are. So it's a really nice kind of smooth play style. You just kind of run through the map, just chuck down your traps. They fire out wherever. By the way, we're in like 400 corruption right now. Character's level 100. So yeah, it's been pushing really well through corruption. Surprisingly pretty tanky. And there's a couple of reasons for that, and I'll go into that soon after this. And then the other thing we're doing with the build is basically using net and smoke bomb to give us kind of temporary buffs. They both have some really nice damage steroids for this build. So you kind of chuck out your net and drop your smoke bomb, and then just kind of stand in the smoke and it just blow everything up. So here's the boss. And as you can see, it goes down pretty quick. Okay, so let's get into what's actually going on here. So first, let's go through the skills. So our main skill is going to be Acid Flask, and it's a very simple tree. It's just these nodes here, and basically we want Explosive Flask here, which is going to convert physical to fire damage, and it's going to give us 100% more hit damage, but we can no longer poison. So we're doing pure fire damage with Acid Flask. And then these nodes here are a massive amount of flat throwing fire damage, which is great. And these nodes are a massive amount of increased crit chance and increased crit multiplier. These are actually really insane nodes, especially for this build, and I'll kind of point out when I get to the passives like why these are so strong. But basically we are crit capped like very easily with essentially zero investment on gear. You need like maybe 40% increased crit somewhere, and then you're completely crit capped. And you know, 200 crit multi is also just massive. So really strong. Acid Flask does really great damage with this build, and part of that is because we can throw it with Explosive Trap. So Explosive Trap is kind of our utility skill. It does do some damage, but it doesn't do nearly as much damage as Acid Flask. So we basically use it to throw out as many traps as possible, and also to get some like temporary buffs and debuffs. So the main thing you need is Trap Sprinkler. That's what's going to throw traps at nearby enemies. And then also this automated bombardment is going to give you 100% chance if you have all of these. But obviously it increases the mana cost by quite a bit. So solving mana is definitely the hardest thing for this build. And there are some very like strict requirements with mana. Mainly you need these these tier 7 minus throwing attack mana costs. It took me forever to get this ring. I basically found this at level 99. So I was very far into corruption scaling already just to get the tier 7. And then I duplicated it with a Rune of Creation just because they're so freaking rare, and it's so hard to get one with like also good prefixes and good suffixes that is actually usable. So yeah, if you have some of these laying around, you might want to save them for if you're planning on playing a build like this. You might want to save them, but don't plan on just finding these very often because they are very rare to hit that tier 7. And you really do need the tier 7 because that's going to give you -5. Tier 6 is only -4, and then anything lower than tier 6 is -3. And you need both of these -5s in order for Acid Flask to cost 0 mana. Like, if I take that off, you can see it costs 4 mana. Yeah, so if you don't have 2 tier 7s, it's going to be spending mana every time each of your flasks triggers off of Explosive Trap. And remember, we're actually throwing 5 of these at once, so you're paying 5 times the Acid Flask mana cost every time these traps detonate. So every time you throw, basically, in addition to the Explosive Trap mana cost, which is also quite high. So there is a lot of mana issues to solve in the build, and I do have quite a bit of mana regeneration as well. I'm at 22 mana regen, and I would say you need at least like 20 to 25 mana regen per second for this to actually feel good. And so these nodes over here, you can see like +2 additional traps thrown, but also +16 to the mana cost. So we're throwing 5 traps from, you normally throw 1, so this gives us +2, so that gets you to 3. And then Trappist right here, if you're taking both of the lightning conversion and the cold conversion, Trappist is going to throw 2 more. And luckily this does not have a extra mana cost associated with it. So you can throw out 5 at once that way, but you do have a very high mana cost. And so you really need these minus mana cost nodes and mana efficiency nodes as well, just in order to make that actually work. And just some of the other stuff, like this node right here is incredibly strong, like maybe unintended strong. It basically gives us like up to 100+ stacks of Dust Shroud just like while we're clearing. You can see right here, like our Dust Shroud just keeps stacking up higher and higher. And our dodge chance is like 70-80%, and our Glancing Blow is like 200%, because Dust Shrouds just give you a ton of dodge and Glancing Blow. So with basically 0 investment, like you can see I'm only at 10% dodge without throwing stuff, and I'm at 16 Glancing Blow. So like you don't need to invest in those types of defenses for this build, which is great. You kind of just get them for free from this node right here. And then you'll also get additional damage per Dust Shroud you have for Explosive Trap. And again, Explosive Trap is not our main source of damage, so that's not as important, but it does help a little bit. And then we're just taking some like extra trigger area, detonation area. Adaptive Fuse is nice because it just does instant explosions on fast enemies, so traps detonate more easily. But a lot of the times you're just kind of detonating by overthrowing your traps, because there's a limit to the number of traps that can be on the ground at once. So you kind of just like end up detonating them automatically. So that node is not super important to the build, but it is kind of just nice to have. And then we just get some extra fire res shred from here. You only need 1 point here because like it only stacks up to 10, I believe, and you end up hitting that really quickly because again we're throwing 5 traps at once, so it's like 2 throws and they're max stacks of fire res shred. And then Flash Frozen here is going to just going to give us some chill, and it's also going to give us freeze rate per int. And actually this is an int stacking build, so you'll see I have a 78 intelligence right now. Part of the reason we do that is for ward retention. Int gives 4% ward retention per point. And then the other reason we do that is because in the Falconer tree, there is this node, Expert Duelist, and it says fire penetration per int with a staff, plus 2%. So every point of int is giving us 2% fire pen as long as we're wielding a staff. And I am using Airgon's Refuge, which has up to 20 int on it. And it gives you 10% less damage taken if you have at least 1,000 ward, which obviously we do. And it also captures fire res. So it's a really nice defensive staff. And then with that node, you also get 40 fire pen out of it. And then if you can get some LP on there and just get some extra increased damage, like increased fire damage or crit multi, stuff like that, it can get pretty strong. Also, it has mana regen in the implicit, which is, again, quite necessary for the build. So, yeah, this staff is just kind of perfect for this build, even though it's technically a Flame Ward staff, and obviously we're not using Flame Ward, but it's still great for this build. The other staff you might want to consider, especially for like leveling. I used like what's it called? Bow's Anarchy, and the main reason is because it has -3 throwing attack mana cost. So before you get these -5 rings, you can use this thing. It's also got 18% more throwing damage to bosses and rare enemies, which is kind of nice, and it gives you some block chance and stuff. So yeah, you can use that as kind of like a leveling staff before you get this thing. This bows is like very common. Airgon's is quite rare, and it's hard to get LP on it. So if you can only get a bows, like that's actually pretty decent for a while. But yeah, ultimately you're gonna want this Airgon's. And then of course we're using Exsanguinous for low life setup. Plus these gloves with the experimented mod that gives the same stat, current health loss per second, missing health gained as ward per second. Plus Bone Clamor Barbet, which is going to do some ward per second based on our uncapped necrotic res. We're not really stacking necrotic res very much, but if you can kind of get it on other pieces of gear, it's actually pretty nice. The rest of our gear is kind of pretty straightforward, just lots of intelligence wherever we can get it. Some res, some cooldown recovery, move speed. We're using the Gambit of an Erased Rogue because it gives +1 to all rogue skills, and then I got lucky and got some mana regen on there, so I just have been using this thing. Belt, just some health, hybrid health. I really like this 1.5 seconds of travel skill cooldown recovered on potion use, mainly because Shift is our travel skill. And Shift has this node right here, which consumes a potion on use if you are below 50% health, which we always are because it's a low life build. So every time we shift, it's going to automatically consume a potion, and it's going to cut our cooldown on shift by 1.5 seconds. And it's already a pretty low cooldown, so it brings the cooldown to like 1.2 seconds, which is just feels really nice for moving around as long as you have potions. And we don't really need potions for anything else because potions are recovering our life, but we actually don't want life. We're a ward build, so one thing you can do is also use Chains of Ularos to make ward potions grant ward instead of health. But I've been really unlucky and have not gotten a like 2 LP or higher chains yet, so I have not really switched to it, just because my current belt offers so much with like the mana regen and the traversal skill cooldown and the health and all that stuff. It's been hard to switch, but this thing also has a ton of necrotic res on it, which is great with Bone Clamor. And then Amulet is just some more mana regen, some LE damage, res, health, whatever. So that's kind of the gearing. Yeah, just going back to the skills. So these are our 2 main damage skills. Shift we use for mana recovery. So these nodes in Shift are really nice because mana gain below half health, 48. So you basically recover half your mana pool every time you shift when you're at low HP. Or sorry, when you're at low HP, which is always. And then we're invulnerable while shifting, and then we actually automatically drop an Acid Flask while shifting as well. And this actually also procs this node right here, Sapping Strikes. So the Acid Flask that we use, or that gets triggered from shift, for some reason seems to count as using it directly, even though it's a triggered one, and it does proc this mana gain and health gain. So that's just like a little bit of extra sustain there. It also will proc flow. It gives you an extra stack of flow. So like we do that. If it hits something, I think it procs flow. Could be wrong about that actually. I'm not sure. I thought it did for some reason. But anyways, flow we're using to basically stack up rhythm, which gives us throwing attack speed buff. And we want as much throwing attack speed as possible. I'll go through the rest of this in a second, but the other skills we're using are Smoke Bomb. And Smoke Bomb is mainly for smoke blades here. So you and allies are granted smoke blades each second for 4 seconds while you're standing in the smoke. And it basically just stacks up a ton of flat throwing damage. And then Umbral Assault also is going to summon a shadow every second while we're in the smoke cloud. And those shadows are going to also throw explosive traps. So if we drop this, you can see the shadows appearing. And then you can see they also throw traps. So you just get extra traps, more damage. So this is just a really strong steroid for this build. We're also just getting some Crimson Shroud stacks, which is just giving us reduced damage over time taken. And we're doing Silver Shroud stacks as well, which are going to block a hit. And we're cleansing ailments. So there's just some nice utility you get from Smoke Bomb. I think this is a pretty standard setup. And something that is kind of new is Net. So Net is in the Falconer tree. I love this skill. I think it's one of the most underrated skills right now. It's got so much utility, and it's actually, I've played it as like a bleed net build, which it's actually really good damage as well. But for this, it's pure utility. And the main thing you want is Leading the Hunt is going to give you this buff, which grants 10% damage against slowed or immobilized enemies. That's a global damage buff. And it's also giving us a global attack speed buff. So these are both going to affect our acid flask damage. So when you throw out the net, you don't even have to hit anything, but you just get this buff automatically. We also use it to trigger Smoke Bomb. So I actually don't ever press my Smoke Bomb button. I just throw the net and it drops the Smoke Bomb. So you get, it's just nice because you get the steroid from the Smoke Bomb and the steroid from the net at the same time, and you just do a lot of damage. So you just drop that on bosses or whatever. Net itself also immobilizes enemies, or it slows bosses. So it doesn't fully immobilize bosses, but it does add a pretty massive slow. And then you also get 3 stacks of slow. You also get enemies cannot dodge, and enemies cannot crit if they're affected by net. Or sorry, cannot avoid crits. So you don't have to worry about like crit avoid modifiers on your monoliths. And then we get 3 stacks of frailty. We get enemies damage from net do less physical damage. And then just make the net last longer. We also disable the backflip because I find it annoying. And you also tend to backflip out of your Smoke Bomb, so you kind of don't want that. Yeah, so that's net is just like a really nice utility skill to have, and it's a good steroid for any throwing build. Actually, it's not even specific to throwing. It's just a nice attack speed, general attack speed, and damage buff. So it's pretty cool. And yeah, that's it for skills. So passive tree, we are taking like just some flat damage, some attack speed, and 5 points in evasion just for the less damage taken while moving. Getting some haste. These nodes, I don't know how required these are anymore now that I have my mana kind of figured out with the -5 mana cost rings. But before you get that, the other nice thing about net is it's actually a 0 cost skill with at least like, I think you just need like -3 on both rings for net to be 0 cost. So it's much easier to get the cost of net to be 0, which means you can actually throw net out whenever you need mana. You can just spam it a little bit and you get mana back from Sapping Strikes. So it up until you figure out your mana like sustain issues, net can be helpful in that regard. Most of our points are going to be in the Bladedancer tree, and the main reason for going Bladedancer on this build is Death's Door. And this thing gives you -24% damage taken at low health, which is always, and plus 24% flat base crit while at low health. So this is where all our crit chance is coming from. And if you remember, in our Acid Flask tree, Piercing Debris gives us 200% increased crit chance. So between the base like 5% crit chance plus the 24% base crit chance from that that other Death's Door node, and then 200% increase, that brings you up to like almost 90% crit just with that, without any other investment anywhere else. So all you need is like 40% crit or something from anywhere, which is like a single affix or a single implicit or whatever, to just cap your crit. So it's super easy to be crit capped, and then you obviously get this massive amount of crit multi for this build as well. So yeah, it's a really nice synergy there. So these nodes are basically the entire reason for going Bladedancer for this build. But then you also get All In, which is another 75 crit multi for free, and you have no downside here because you're crit capped, so you don't have to worry about less damage dealt by 9 crits or less damage over time. The other stuff we're doing, so you just have Dex and Glancing Blow. You basically just need a lot of points in this area just to be able to like get all the way up to Death's Door. Like none of these other things are relevant at all to us because we're not dual wielding, we're not doing melee, we're not doing bleed, so like none of this stuff matters. So you just need a bunch of points down here, and like these are kind of the only somewhat relevant things. Like this gives us health and like, yeah, some chance of Dust Shroud when hit, but like we're stacking so many stacks of Dust Shroud already that the Dust Shroud from this doesn't really matter. It's just kind of the health. This is just flat fizz, throwing damage, throwing attack damage, yeah, whatever. I mean, like, it's not great, you know. There's like some relevant nodes here, but it's really just this is kind of the main reason to be a Bladedancer. And then in the Falconer tree, we have some haste and some damage with haste, just health and dodge. Increased mana regen, again, is really important because we have a lot of mana issues. And then these are really good because they give us throwing attack damage and throwing attack speed, which are both very important for the build. And then obviously Expert Duelist just for that fire pen per int, which is kind of the whole point of the staff. So yeah, that's kind of the whole setup. Just in terms of idols, nothing too crazy, but the +1 max trap with explosive trap and throwing attack speed. We don't really care about the max traps on this. We just care about the throwing attack speed. So we use 2 with throwing attack speed on there. And then, you know, armor shred duration is kind of nice because we get a bunch of armor shred from this node right here in the Acid Flask tree. And the rest of these are kind of just filling out res and health and fire damage, whatever. Yeah, the interesting thing about increased damage on this build is that because we have so much, like, essentially free crit multi from, we have 200% here, and then 75% here, like, because of that, crit multi is actually less valuable of a stat to have on gear. And we actually don't have a ton of increased damage, so, like, getting a good increased damage modifier on your weapon is, like, really important. We also get +4 explosive trap on our Sanguinus, and that comes with the throwing damage as well, so that's another nice source of increased damage. But like those are kind of our only 2 like big sources of increased damage, and because we're not really scaling dexterity very much. We're scaling int, but our skills scale with dexterity, so we're not getting a ton of increased damage from dex scaling. So like you do have to kind of prioritize increased damage a little bit more than like crit multi on some of your gear. And then like, yeah, the other main things to focus on is just getting int on every single piece of gear you can, because again, int is like our best stat because it gives us extra ward retention, so essentially more EHP, and then it gives us also the massive amount of fire pen. So like with about 80 int, we're getting like 160 fire penetration, so that's 160% more damage essentially. So yeah, very strong. Really like the build. Let's see if I can do like a quick Orobis for you, just so you can see what the bossing kind of looks like. It's pretty straightforward. Like you kind of just end up dodging everything because you have almost maxed dodge chance. But yeah, you throw down your smoke bomb, you throw down your net, and then you kind of just stand there and boss dies. And like when you get low on mana, you can just shift again to like recover your mana pool quickly. So that's really nice. And then once the boss gets down to 16%, you can just shift through them and they die instantly because of this node, Consumed by Shadows. So it adds a melee strike to the shift and then adds a kill threshold of 16%. So it just makes bossing a little bit easier because, you know, they tend to have more, they have like endurance and stuff at low HP, so they're a little harder to get through that last couple percent, so that 16% cull really goes a long way. So I like this node a lot. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the builds. Hope you like it. I'll share a last Epoch Tools link with you know, link to the build, so if you want to copy that or whatever, go for it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.